I will be honest enough to say that every one of these 5 things has at one time or another been an idol in my life. So I don't want to come across as judgmental. But I also don't want to stick my head in the sand and act like these things aren't a real risk. Paul writes to the saints in Corinth and says, "Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Don't be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God." I've heard plenty of sermons and Bible classes about adultery, homosexuality, greed, and drunkenness, etc. But I honestly can't recall any significant time being spent on the topic of idolatry. And when the topic was brought up, it was pointing to all that idolatry that happened out there in the world. Out there, those people. But what if there was idolatry happening right in front of us, inside the church? And what if we were participating in it and didn't even realize it? I'm going to suggest today that there actually is idolatry inside the church. And I'm not talking about those worldly things like money, materialism, status, career, sports, hobbies, etc. Now make no mistake, all those things can be idols in our lives. But today we're going to focus on some things within the church. Church things that we too often turn into idols. And whether it's a worldly thing or a church thing, an idol is an idol. If it gets in the way of us putting God first in our lives, then Paul says it threatens our opportunity to inherit the kingdom of God. So some self-examination is prudent. Just like false prophets can rise up from within the church, so can idols. We can get so focused on certain church things that they actually become idols and get in the way of serving God the way He calls us to. First on our list today is music. Music comprises a large portion of almost all church services, which is interesting in and of itself because the description of the meeting of the saints in the Bible doesn't really lead in that direction. And not only has music come to take up a large portion of our time together, it's one of those topics that often has a lot of emotion tied to it. One of those topics that leads to division and separation within the church. When we let a topic like this separate us, it clearly has become an idol. Shortly before Jesus was arrested and put on trial, he prayed that we would be so united as saints in God's kingdom that the world would look at us and realize that Jesus really was sent to earth by God. That's John 17, 20, and 21 if you want to look it up. But what does the world see? Well, they see over and over and over again that we can't even agree on what kind of music we have when we come together. They see churches having an early service with one kind of music and a later service with a different kind of music. We can make all kinds of rationalization for this, but the message we're sending to the world is that we are in fact not united. And I bet you know people, just like I do, that have switched churches because they like the song service better at some other church. They put their personal preference for a certain type of music above being devoted to the fellowship like the example set for us in Acts 2:42. We need to stop rationalizing and admit that too many of us have turned our church music into an idol. Next on the list is preacher fandom. You know what I'm talking about. I bet I really don't even need to describe this very much. So many churches spend more time and energy promoting their preacher than they do promoting Jesus. Naming their ministry after their preacher. The sign out front of the church building has the preacher's name on it. A lot of their advertising has the preacher's name on it and not infrequently includes a photo. And even if these things aren't happening in a particular church, most members will say that one of the primary reasons they attend that church is that they like the preacher. I can't count the times I know of where When a church has a significant number of people who stop attending that church because they got a new preacher and don't think about criticizing the preacher. That's a quick way to get yourself put on the naughty list. Been there, done that myself. I suggested that there were some improvements needed with the current preacher, and I quickly found myself uninvited by church leadership from participating in some of the church activities I was previously a part of. No inquiry as to why I had made those suggestions or what my concerns were. Just uninvited based on hearsay that I didn't like the preacher. Churches don't exist to promote their preachers. Churches exist to promote Jesus. But way too often the preacher becomes an idol within the church and we get focused on the wrong thing. Okay, if you're still with me, let's talk about the next idol within the church. Friendships. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's wrong to have friendships. Friendships, those deep, meaningful relationships with fellow Christians, is a wonderful part of our church experience. But when that friendship gets in the way of focusing on what God calls His church to do, we've made an idol out of that friendship. Let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about. I was serving in leadership for a church, and we were considering making a few changes to some meeting times, the order of certain events, etc. All focused on encouraging the members to be more actively involved with Bible study and some other service-oriented aspects of being a part of that church. A couple of my fellow church leaders voiced their disagreement with making the changes, stating that they had talked to some people that weren't in favor of those changes. As we talked a little more, it became clear that the people they were referencing were their personal friends, though, those folks that they routinely went out to eat with after Sunday morning services most Sundays. To be blunt, these church leaders were putting the preferences of their friends ahead of doing what was best for the overall church. That's nothing other than making an idol out of their friendships. And that's not limited to just people in church leadership roles. We all have to be on guard against this temptation of letting our friendships become an idol. The fourth on our list is church buildings. It turns out that churches spend more on their buildings than any other expense except for salaries. Churches spend multiple times more on their buildings than they do on feeding the poor, helping the homeless, sending missionaries to the field, taking care of widows and orphans, which the Bible describes as the pure and undefiled religion. This focus on the church building was never so apparent to me as when a few years ago in Philadelphia, when I was there for a business leadership course. On the weekend, we took an economic and historical tour of the city as one of our learning events. At one point, we made an unscheduled stop. Our guide, as it turns out, had some connections, and we were able to visit an old historic cathedral in what was once a booming and thriving part of that city. We were invited to go inside and see this elaborate cathedral. Huge stained glass windows, numerous statuettes, and massive columns and beams above a fancy, immaculate sanctuary. It was pretty stunning. We were told about how much time, effort, and money it took just to maintain this place. And to their credit, it was very well maintained. Their pride in their building was quite obvious. There's only one problem. Literally 30 feet across the road from the front of the church building was dilapidated housing with broken doors, broken out windows, trash laying around. And in the middle of the afternoon, homeless sitting on the sidewalks, drug-addicted people standing on the street corner. Jesus told the rich young ruler to sell all he had and give it to the poor. Do we somehow think that doesn't apply to spending millions on maintaining our church buildings when the poor are literally across the street or a few blocks away? So yeah, church buildings can become idols. Finally, our fifth idol within the church, our preferred brand of church. I mean, what brand of church are you a part of? Protestant, Catholic, Methodist, Lutheran, Baptist, Southern Baptist, or Reformed Baptist? non-denominational neighborhood church. The possibilities are nearly endless these days. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. What he didn't say is, no one comes to the Father except through this particular kind of church. So when we spend our efforts on promoting our brand of church as the best way to go, which is what I routinely observe happening these days, we've moved Jesus into second place. We spend more time and words talking about our brand of church than we do talking about Jesus. In other words, we've made an idol out of our church. If you want to pursue some of these topics further, I'll put some links in the description below, and you can dive a bit further into some of these. 5 idols inside the church: music, the preacher, my personal friendships, the church building, and my particular brand of church. Each one of these can easily become an idol in our lives, something that we place higher priority on than serving God as He instructed us to do so. And I will be honest enough to say that every one of these 5 things has at one time or another been an idol in my life. So I don't want to come across as judgmental, but I also don't want to stick my head in the sand and act like these things aren't a real risk, because they are. So I share them in hopes that they might help you take a look at yourself and your church and see if maybe there's some idol purging that needs to take place. Thanks for listening. God bless you on your journey.